Good afternoon and welcome to Pointing at the Moon, our conversations here in the Peace Pagoda here at the Providence Zen Center. Today we're joined by Jan Sendzimir, JDPSN, one of the teachers here in the Kwan Um School of Zen with us, environmental scientist and current abbot of the Vienna Zen Center. Is that correct? Jan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So Jan, you are our first layperson that we've had in the pagoda to have these kind of conversations with. And so, as kind of part of that, I just wanted to start with maybe a little bit of your story. How did you first come to Zen? And what was it that kind of connected with you about it?
When I was in Africa, I spent a year in West Africa in 1970 as an exchange student, and the people were very gracious and very kind, but they had a very strange idea about who I was. And so I was struggling to say, thank you so much, but actually I'm not like that, and I was stuck. And so I started looking, and I started actually going back to religions which I had run away from. I thought, that was just for superstitious people. And I found that the religions had really been asking that question for a long time. And Zen, when I finally encountered it, was the one thing that wouldn't let me off the hook. It said, as soon as you think you've found an answer, you've gone to sleep. And in my mind at that time, I thought, gosh, it doesn't matter how old I am, this won't grow old. And I've never, since then, I've never varied from that. I'm very happy to encounter people from other, ways and practices. But Zen for me has always been at the heart of it.
Is there something that brought you to the Kwan Um School of Zen over perhaps a Japanese Soto or Rinzai style, or are you a bit like me where it was just sort of the one that was most accessible and you fell into?
It's more the latter. From 3 years later, I graduated from the university, and I really knew I wanted to live in a Zen center. I didn't know which. And I had a grandiose idea of going around the world. I was going to try all the Zen centers in the US, maybe go to Japan. And I just happened to be living in Providence at the beginning. And my friend said, there's a Zen center here. And I said, great. And I went, and there was Daesan Sanim. And I'm surreptitiously looking out the side, kind of checking him out. Is he the guy? Is he the guy? And it became clear within minutes, I had no idea how to check him out. So I thought, why don't you just stay right here till things become clear? And I never left.
So here we are, several decades later. Tell me, what was the Providence Zen Center like during your time there? What was the social dynamic like? How was the practice? Give us a sense of Providence Zen Center back when you were a resident there.
This is an important question for me because as a teacher who's over 70, I have to remind myself that the reality young students have is very different from what we had at that time. It somehow, I think, with the economy was much easier to take time off and get back and find a job. So actually there was no such thing as a Zen day or even Zen weekend. We had Yonmin Jonjins, and they started at 5 days. I was the second group to go to Korea for Kyolche for 3 months in 1976. And so it just was the spirit of that time. There was a tremendous amount of energy in the air. We were so grateful that what we thought was only accessible by going to the Orient was here. And so we really pitched in, knowing, no, I don't have to fly to Japan or Korea or any other place. It's right here. So there was a real intensity, and practicing day and night seemed the norm. Now it's much more difficult.
Well, thank you for that. And that's one of the questions I think a lot of Zen centers kind of face these days is how the social dynamics of the Zen centers and the people who are able to be residents and kind of give their times over that has seemed to have changed, at least from the people that I've spoken to. You're abbot of a Zen center yourself. What do you see the function and roles of a place like the Providence Zen Center, a residential Zen space here in the 21st century where the work demands are now much more different, the socioeconomic, just the cost of living, good Lord, has gone up tremendously. Mm-hmm. How do you see the function of these places after all of these decades? Has it changed at all? Has some things remained the same?
I'd like to set the record straight. Nominally, I'm the abbot, but actually, as an expat American in Austria, we've been doing everything we can to have the local students take ownership of it. So actually, the directing is actually now being done by an executive committee of Austrians, with advice from my partner, Zen Master Hyunja, myself, and Knut Rosenmeier, Popsanim. So as far as the social dynamic, we had a residential Zen center, which was Zen Master Hyunja and myself. We were the residents, and we turned over a third of our apartment, and we found after, at 70, we actually needed a little more private space, so we've now gone to a different arrangement. We have our own apartment, and we have, a Zen center in a small apartment. I think people here in Providence should really appreciate that you have spent 40 years building something that's standing. It's very hard to set up a Zen center, very hard to set up that tradition, and you have all this momentum behind you. We've been trying to nudge things over the line in Vienna for 30 years. We have people who attend, but we would not be able to do anything remotely like this. So in Europe, what we've done is we've built several centers up as kind of regional retreat centers. George Haselbauer, Popsanim, who used to be here in Providence for a while as abbot, has made a beautiful meditation center there in rural Czech Republic. We also have a meditation center in the Pyrenees. So these are special things, but most of the places are nothing like this. They're apartments that people get together in. That's a much wider question, but in the short time we have.
Sure, that makes sense. You've brought up a few times Zen Master Hyunja, your partner. And we know the story of the Buddha when they were speaking to Ananda, and Ananda said, "Lord Buddha, I figured it out. Spiritual friendship is at least half of the spiritual life." To which the Buddha responded, "Not so, Ananda. It's the whole of it." You've been very blessed to find more than just spiritual friendship in your kind of partnership.
Well, I'm a very fortunate man that after my wife passed away in 2010, I was trying to regroup, and someone said, there's this very, very interesting teacher up in Berlin. And I decided to pitch myself into Zen and really get involved in it as a way of getting grounded. So I went up there, and within a short order, she came down, and we've been building a stronger and stronger relationship over 10 years. So I'm very, very grateful for her support and her insight. I think there is something we should say about that. We increasingly notice that there can be boundary crossings, and we have to be very careful as teachers not to cross boundaries with students, to respect the student's space and make the student feel completely safe to practice. And therefore, it's actually something we're working on now as to how much of a relationship a teacher can have with someone who is a student. In fact, actually, if a deep relationship starts, the teacher should step back and say, "I am not a teacher in this case," and declare it to everybody. Just trying to keep our very painful experience. All the schools over the last 50 years have had a number of cases which make this necessary as a new discipline for us. So that is something which adds to it. But it adds to it in this sense that I totally agree with you that we need this friendship. I think if anything, a sense of community and friendship is something we can only build more of, that it would really help. We have a strong practice, but it's usually in silence. So to me, this is a direction for our school to do more and more community activities in friendship that people feel this commonality. But at the same time, this experience has meant that we also have to be a little bit more disciplined about the way we have relations with each other. So that there are kind of two things happening at the same time.
Makes sense. As one continues to kind of increase and grow, so too must we keep an eye on it as well to make sure it grows in ways that are healthy and helpful for everyone at the end of the day. Kind of returning, back to you, how, as a JDPSN and someone who became a JDPSN within just the past couple of years. How do you articulate, or how do you view your role now as a teacher of Zen students who come here for Kyolche to sit with you, and your students out there in Austria or wherever you may end up?
Well, I'm really fresh off the boat, having decided at the age of 73 to start a new career. I have been blessed to be invited to a few places in Poland. I just taught in Lithuania, and I have taught also in Hungary. So to me, I don't have an established relations. I'm being invited back. So I feel relations are deepening in a very friendly way. Already I've been invited back with Zen Master Hyonja to teach in Lithuania in October. Of course, teaching in Vienna is an ongoing thing, but it's more in a sense of collegiality and friendship. I don't have, therefore, a defined, how can I say, there's no group around me. It's more the network across Europe, so far friendly, and probably I will be invited again and again, and that's all I can ask for. I'm not trying to build anything special. It's more that people, when they think of it, would say, yeah, let's have Jan over here for one time. You know?
Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of curious, actually. This kind of goes beyond just your role as a JDPSN, but as one of our Zen students here in our tradition. As I mentioned in the beginning, you're our first one we've been chatting with who is a layperson like me, who has not taken monastic vows, cut off the ignorance grass, as they say. When we spoke with Zen Master Ji Kwang, he mentioned, same job, just kind of different life functions and situations at the end of the day. But I'm curious for you as a layperson in a religious practice tradition, for lack of a better word or different word, that's for most of its history been heavily dominated by a monastic core. How is it for you being a layperson when you first came into it, and how is it for you today? Do you feel any real kind of sense around that, or did at the beginning? Give me kind of the picture around that, if you don't mind.
Well, I want to go back to Korea, where Zen Daesan Sanim was looking after the graves of Japanese soldiers because no one else was. The Japanese noticed this and invited him, and that was the start of a journey where he was adapting Korean Buddhism to Japan and then here. And that is the base. It's a revolution. If you go to Korea, you'll see that we are actually doing things differently in our own way as an experiment how to bring Korean Zen to the West. But that experiment started over 50 years ago now, and it's not the same world. Just as we were talking about boundary crossings, there are all kinds of ways in which how we practice together will probably have to evolve as society changes. I could just name one thing. Artificial intelligence may put 40% of lawyers out of work. So, in other words, we could be in a world where actually having a job may be a very different thing from what it was like when we started 50 years ago. And we should be here for the Sangha and people around us. So what shape that takes, I don't know yet. And that's why I'm asking young people all the time, because I'm very aware that I don't know. And we have to adapt to it, to find out what it is that'll work for people in this day and age. Now, to get back to that, the monastic core, as you'd say, part of that is if you are in a monastery and you are practicing night and day for months, the form is something that you will get within a year. And our form is elaborate. Not as elaborate as some, but it takes some learning. It can take months. And what was true in the 1970s, where people came and they practiced night and day in centers all over, is less and less so. So what form would attract people? Could it be too intimidating to have something that we started with, where people would just, if they only come once a week, they never do get the chance. In other words, they never do learn how to chant. So, for instance, in the Vienna Zen Center now, we're only doing 2 chants in the evening. The Heart Sutra in German and the Great Dharani. Because we find generally that people are not practicing long enough and consistently enough to make that an easy step to learn all the chanting. Now we encourage people to go to Musangsa, we encourage them to go to Kyolche, both in Czech Republic and Poland and Spain, and then it may become possible, but that's the minority. So basically what I'd say is we try to identify good students, encourage them, and then get them to go someplace where they can practice long enough to catch the form. That's about the only way I can see to do it. Because if you do it once a week, and maybe that's sporadic and it's once every other week, you're not going to pick it up.
So right now, you're currently sitting up at our Kyolche, leading as our teacher up there. Kind of to what you were just saying, there's a lot of folks who will come and practice, maybe once a week, maybe once every other week, or whenever their schedule allows, and, that's sort of their life situation at the end of the day. A big part of our kind of traditional practice here is kind of sitting retreats and that sort of thing.
So every single one of us has, you might say, walls inside our mind. Each one of us may have our own set. We make it, right? It's come out of our own life. Now, if you try to sit for 5 minutes and you've never sat before, you're going to hit a wall. If you try to sit then for an hour, you'll hit another wall, maybe 2. And if you try to sit for 3 days, there'll be other walls you'll encounter. What we really encourage is a mind that stays open, in fact, curious, warm and loving in the sense of accepting this situation as it is. And that means when you encounter the wall, you look at it and you become intimate with it and see, this is how my mind works. You watch your mind. So if you're really curious, you can keep looking, and the longer you look, you're going to encounter more and more. For most people, that's true. Some people are faster, some people are slower. The main thing is, it's basically creating a safe space for your curiosity to really encounter something and sink into it.
I've got to ask this question as a fellow former Floridian, where we have both lived in Florida for some time and also have had the privilege of being able to travel outside the state. Tell me, how do you look back on your home after all this time?
Well, it's really strange because Florida is not standing still. So when we talk about Florida, there are different Floridas. When I was born in 1950, there were less than 1 million people. Now there are over 22 million people. So in my lifetime, Florida has increased by 22 times, which is really beyond the imagination. There was a time when a city would end, you'd be forest, and another city would begin. Now that's disappeared. I go back increasingly because my daughters are there, and I have a grandson, I have a granddaughter on the way, and so it's my immense pleasure and fortune that I can go and spend time with them. But Florida is not the place that I knew when I was there and went to university in 1980. As a New Englander, I was especially trying not to fall in the trap of which all Floridians and Southerners can't stand, of a know-it-all Northerner who's going to tell them. In fact, when I arrived in Gainesville, Florida in 1980, one of the popular bumper stickers at that time was, "I don't care how the hell you do it up north." So I worked really hard. In fact, it was lucky I was young and a lot of my friends were building houses. That was a great way to get to know somebody. Just go and swing a hammer and, or bring the pizza, whatever. But it is something, though, that we could live in different places if we have a mind that's open and we listen carefully. And that's where I feel our practice is important, and the practice really helped me as a Northerner moving to Florida, or as an American moving to Europe. So that is one way in which someone can definitely see the benefits of our practice.
Yeah. Some of my fondest memories are sitting those early retreats with you and Alma. She was at Judo Pope's team at the time, up there in Gainesville together in, a little kind of retreat rental place, and then once or twice in that small little kind of townhouse apartment, and moving everything to the side to try and fit like 15 cushions in there once. And it was really such a marvelous experience where I was able to grow from. So thank you for offering that in Florida. And if anyone is interested in practicing in Florida, Orlando Zen Center, please go visit. Great group of folks. One of the big things that Florida is known for is for a lot of the environmental work that goes on there. The Everglades Restoration Project is one of the largest environmental engineering projects, if not the largest, maybe aside from the Hoover Dam and things like that has occurred in this country. You are an environmental scientist as well as a Zen teacher and Zen student. So I'd like to kind of end by asking, how do you see the role of this practice in Zen students in confronting the challenge, which is climate change?
So I started as a wetlands ecologist, but I think there's a subject, since there's not so much time, I'll concentrate on, and that's fire. Florida, when I came, was already interested in fire enough that we were doing a lot of prescribed burning, intelligently burning in order to lower the danger. Turns out Florida was ahead of much of the rest of the country. Some people even are coming from California to learn. What's important about that is it's come from experimenting. And what's happening right now in our world, we are facing times, for instance, fire in some cases is behaving in ways we still don't quite understand. It's in new ways. The world is entering a new phase. So if I, as a scientist, don't quite have the answer, and no one has the answer, we have to find it by experimenting. And that requires everyone to hold hands and take a risk, because these experiments are not small, they're big, they're whole landscapes. For instance, when I was in Europe, one of the things that we were experimenting with is opening the dikes and allowing a river to flood naturally. It takes a lot of courage for people to say, okay, we'll try that experiment. The same with perhaps allowing fire to burn and burn our landscapes the way it was 300 to 400 years ago. We don't exactly know how to do it. So where that connects with the practice is that trust. When you can hold hands with people say, okay, with you, I'll take a risk. I feel that trust can come from someone with a very open mind and a glad heart. And to me, that can emerge from this kind of practice. I want to mention two things besides the practice quite quickly. One is I have taught biology and I've taught ecology now for over 40 years. And we see that one thing that's happened is that we didn't teach science that well. It was too much rote memorization, and few people know how to do science, to make observations and find out what is valuable, to get that information to the point where you actually can analyze it and actually can make a conclusion from it. In other words, learning, real learning that you can count on over time. That will increase our knowledge base. Most people have never done it. That's done by scientists. We actually should be doing this back in grade school, in middle school. You could do these kind of things so that people understand what it means to actually create information everyone can trust. The second thing is we're living in a digital age where algorithms that we don't completely understand are manipulating people's behavior. And the algorithm is rewarded, or it seeks clicks. And if you are looking at your page and are given alternatives you might be interested in, it's found that there'll be more clicks if it's a little bit more radical. So people have been jumping from relatively benign things to rather extreme ideas they found in some cases in only 4 jumps. And so this is something that can really amplify people's mistrust, amplify confusion, etc. It's throwing us into extremes. It's basically tilted the playing field so that people tend to become more radical one way or the other. Now for our practice, it's very similar to what I was saying about an open heart and a mind that is also not judging, is something which might be the basis for an honest conversation with people you disagree with. I have a student in Namibia who's having trouble with people in a similar way, and I did research with friends of mine who know a lot about this, and I recommend a book called How to Have Impossible Conversations, about people who've researched this as to how to speak with people you don't agree with. Now, to get this back to our practice, a good friend of mine was an attendant to Zen Master Tony Packer, and he would guide people to interviews with her. And often Tony Packer would not say anything, would simply look at them, and the person would start to cry because they said, I had never met somebody who totally did not judge me, totally accepted me for who I am. And that came from a lifetime of practice. So to me, that's the kind of thing that can emerge from our practice, a presence, an atmosphere of openness that would make someone feel safe, even to take a risk with ideas that they don't exactly trust.
Well, Jan, thank you so much for coming today with an open mind and a glad heart, and it's always a pleasure to sit down with you.
So, same here. Thanks so much for inviting.
And thank you all for listening. If you'd like to help support us, you can go to providencezen.org for all of our scheduled practice times. All of our practices are open. You are welcome to come and experience all of this for yourself. You can also donate online if you'd like to help support us financially. So thank you.